She was completely unaware her husband was the $47 billion CEO. So the night before their 15th anniversary, she kicked him out of their home, changed the locks, and told him he was too broke and too country for the life she deserved. Her new boyfriend, a flashy real estate developer, stood in the doorway wearing a Rolex, filming the whole humiliation on his phone while the neighbors watched. What this woman didn't know was that the quiet farmer she'd spent 15 years mocking actually owned 847,000 acres across 3 states. Every luxury subdivision her boyfriend had ever built, constructed on land he was unknowingly leasing from the man he was destroying. The house she was keeping in the divorce? She never owned it. And when her husband finally opened a lockbox his grandmother told him to save for the day you're ready to know what we really are, he discovered something that would bring both their worlds crashing down in less than 2 weeks. The question is, how do you dismantle someone's entire empire when that empire was secretly built on ground you already own? Before we get into this story, do me a favor. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we bring you stories like this every single week. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from today? Your city, your country. I want to know who's listening. Now let me take you back to where this started, a quiet street in Stone Mountain, Georgia, at 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday night, when a man named Raymond Patterson pulled into his driveway after 14 hours working the family farm and discovered that the locks on his front door had been changed. Raymond's 2009 F-150 rattled as he turned onto Magnolia Drive at 11:34 p.m., headlights cutting through the humid Georgia night. 14 hours in the fields had left his shoulders aching and his work boots caked with red clay. Tomorrow would be their 15th anniversary. He'd planned to wake early, shower off the farm smell Simone always complained about, and take her to breakfast at that place in Buckhead she liked. The porch light was on, which was unusual for this hour. He pulled into the driveway and tried his key in the front door. It didn't turn. Raymond tried again, jiggling the handle. The lock had been changed. He stepped back, confused, and that was when the door swung open. Simone stood in the entrance, wearing the white silk robe he'd bought her last Christmas, the one she said was too cheap-looking to post on Instagram. Behind her, backlit by the living room lamp, stood a man Raymond had seen before at one of Simone's influencer events. Terrell something. The real estate developer with the billboards all over Atlanta. The man was wearing a Rolex that caught the porch light. "You can't come in," Simone said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "I changed the locks." Raymond looked past her at Terrell, who smirked and raised a phone, filming. Mrs. Chen's porch light flickered on across the street. The neighbor had come out to watch. "Simone, what's going on?" "What's going on is I'm done." She crossed her arms. "I'm done with this country life. I'm done being married to a broke farmer who embarrasses me everywhere we go." Raymond felt the words land, but kept his face neutral. "Can we talk about this inside?" "There's nothing to talk about." Simone's voice rose, performing now for Terrell's camera. "You drive a 15-year-old truck that smells like manure. You wear overalls to church. You show up at my events covered in fertilizer like you don't have any sense. Do you know how that makes me look?" Terrell chuckled behind her. "Man's got a Porsche Cayenne outside," he said, jerking his thumb toward the pearl-white SUV in the driveway. "Latest model. You even know what that costs?" Raymond said nothing. Simone stepped onto the porch, forcing Raymond back. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. And I'm keeping this house because it's the only thing you've managed to own in 15 years of marriage. Everything else, you've got nothing." The words hung in the air between them. Raymond nodded slowly. "I'll get my things." "Make it quick," Terrell said, still filming. "This is going to get so many views." Raymond walked to his truck and lowered the tailgate. He moved through the house in silence while Simone and Terrell watched from the living room sofa. He took his grandmother's quilts from the hall closet, the ones Evelyn had sewn by hand, his work boots from the mudroom, a battered lockbox from the top shelf of their bedroom closet that Simone had mocked for years. "You're really taking that?" Simone laughed. "That junk from dead folks? That's what you're worried about?" Raymond didn't answer. He carried the lockbox to the truck and set it carefully in the passenger seat. Then he went back for the surveyor's map he kept in the glove compartment of Simone's car, the faded document she'd always dismissed as old property lines that didn't mean nothing. Terrell followed him outside, phone raised. "Yo, this is Content Gold. Broke farmer getting kicked out the night before his anniversary. I'm definitely posting this." Raymond folded the map and placed it on top of the lockbox. He climbed into the F-150, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. In his rearview mirror, he saw Simone standing on the porch with Terrell's arm around her waist. Mrs. Chen was still watching from across the street. Raymond drove. He didn't head toward his cousin's place in Decatur or his uncle's house in Lithonia. He just drove, letting muscle memory guide him through streets he'd known his whole life until he found himself pulling into a Waffle House parking lot on Candler Road. The lot was empty except for a server's car and a semi-truck idling near the dumpsters. Raymond turned off the engine and sat in silence. The lockbox rested on the passenger seat where he'd placed it, its brass clasp tarnished with age. He'd carried it from house to house for 15 years, never opening it, because his grandmother had given him one instruction before she died: "Only open this when you're ready to know what we really are." He reached for it, then stopped. His hands were still dirty from the fields, covered in the same red Georgia clay that Simone said made him smell poor. He wiped them on his jeans, but the stains didn't come off. Through the windshield, the Waffle House sign buzzed and flickered. Raymond picked up the lockbox and held it in his lap, feeling its weight. Raymond had met Simone Patterson at Spellman's homecoming in October 2011. She'd been standing near the tailgate section with her sorors, wearing a navy dress that caught the afternoon light, laughing at something one of her line sisters had said. He was 25 then, fresh from burying his grandmother 3 months earlier, still learning what it meant to be the sole heir to everything Evelyn had built. When he'd told Simone he owned land, her eyes had brightened with interest. She'd asked how much, and he'd said 40 acres in DeKalb County. The truth, technically. He just hadn't mentioned the other 846,960 acres spread across 3 states, or the shopping centers, or the office parks, or the 34 subsidiary corporations that made Patterson Heritage Holdings one of the largest private landholders in the Southeast. He'd never corrected her assumption that he was just a small farmer working family property. Their wedding at Ebenezer Baptist Church in June 2012 should have revealed the disparity. Raymond's family had filled the groom's side quietly, dressed in their Sunday best, but nothing flashy. Land-rich people who'd learned generations ago that appearing wealthy invited questions, audits, and the kind of attention that destroyed black fortunes. Simone's family, by contrast, had arrived in rented luxury cars, her mother Diane wearing a hat so large it blocked the view of 3 people in the pew behind her. During the reception at the Piedmont Driving Club, Diane had cornered Raymond's Uncle Clifton by the shrimp table. "I don't understand," she'd said, loud enough for others to hear. "Simone says your family owns all this land, but you all don't look like you have money. Where are the luxury cars, the designer suits? If you're so wealthy, why doesn't it show?" Clifton had smiled and changed the subject. Over the next 15 years, the gap between Simone's expectations and Raymond's reality widened like a crack in foundation concrete. She'd built an Instagram brand called Simone Luxe Life that showcased a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. Designer handbags purchased on credit, spa days that maxed out her American Express, European vacations to Paris and Barcelona that she financed with 0% balance transfers, posting photos with captions about living her best life while the interest rates reset behind the scenes. By 2018, she had 340,000 followers who believed she was married to a successful landowner, not understanding that successful and visible were two different things. Raymond worked the 40-acre family plot every day because his grandmother's will had required it. The document, filed with Patterson Heritage Holdings' corporate attorney, stated clearly that the chief executive officer must personally maintain the original Patterson land to remember where the family came from. So he woke at 5 every morning, drove to the property in his 2009 F-150, and worked the soil until sunset. He came home exhausted, smelling like fertilizer and red clay. Simone's complaints had started small. Why didn't he wear nicer clothes to church? Why did he insist on driving that old truck when they could afford something better? But by 2020, the criticisms had sharpened into something crueler. "Why won't you get a real job?" she'd asked one night after he'd come home from ploughing the south field. "Something in corporate, something I can talk about at brunch without feeling embarrassed." Raymond had showered and gone to bed without answering. The affair had started 2 years ago, in the spring of 2024. Simone had attended a Black Excellence in Real Estate gala at the Hyatt Regency, one of those networking events where aspiring professionals paid $300 per plate to hear successful developers talk about building generational wealth. She'd gone alone because Raymond had a conflict, a board meeting for Patterson Heritage Holdings that he'd told her was a farm cooperative session. That's where she'd met Terrell Morrison. Crown Development Group had seemed impressive from the outside. 17 luxury subdivisions across metro Atlanta. Billboards on Interstate 85 showing Terrell in a tailored suit with his arms crossed. The tagline reading, "Crown Development, building black wealth one home at a time." He drove a red Ferrari, lived in a penthouse in Midtown, and wore watches that cost more than most people's cars. To Simone, he represented everything Raymond wasn't: visible, flashy, successful in ways that could be photographed and posted. The affair had been obvious to anyone paying attention. Simone started going to more evening events, coming home later, spending less time maintaining the illusion of their marriage. Raymond had known, of course. He knew most things that happened in his life because Patterson Heritage Holdings' corporate intelligence division monitored threats to company assets, and Simone was technically a beneficiary of the family trust. He'd seen the security footage of her meeting Terrell at various properties. He'd known, and he'd said nothing. 3 weeks ago, Simone had FaceTimed her mother from the master bedroom, while Raymond was in the barn checking soil samples. She'd propped the phone against a pillow, applying makeup while she talked. "I'm finally doing it, Mama," Simone had said, her voice bright with excitement. "I'm leaving that dirt-poor farmer and marrying a real man with real money." Diane's face on the screen had lit up. "About time, baby. You deserve better than someone who smells like manure. Terrell's taking me to Miami next week, first class. He says once the divorce is final, we're getting married at Greater Mount Calvary. Big wedding. Real wedding, not like that sad little ceremony Raymond's broke family put together." What Simone had never questioned, in all her excitement about Terrell's success, was how a developer could build 17 subdivisions in 5 years on land that somehow never appeared on public property records. What she'd never wondered was who actually owned the ground beneath all that apparent wealth. While Simone had been building her Instagram empire, Raymond had been running Patterson Heritage Holdings from a nondescript office park off Memorial Drive in Decatur. The building sat between a tire shop and a check-cashing store, the kind of location no one would associate with a $47 billion corporation. The sign outside read only Patterson Holdings in modest lettering. No logo, no flourish. Just a name that meant nothing to people who didn't need to know. The story of that empire stretched back to 1865. Raymond's great-great-grandfather Isaac Patterson had been freed that year at age 22, walking away from a plantation in Macon with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to own something that could never be taken. He'd made his way to Atlanta during Reconstruction, worked as a carpenter, saved every dollar, and used the Freedmen's Bureau to claim 40 acres of land in what would eventually become DeKalb County. 40 acres that white farmers had dismissed as too rocky, too difficult, too worthless to fight over. Isaac had known better. His son Thomas Patterson had inherited that land in 1891 and expanded it systematically. During the 1890s, when white landowners were selling off parcels they considered marginal, Thomas bought quietly through intermediaries. By 1897, the Patterson family held 400 acres across 3 counties. Thomas had learned early that visible black wealth attracted violence, so he'd registered the purchases through shell companies and white business partners who took a small fee for lending their names to the deeds. The strategy had kept the family safe and growing. Each generation had added to the holdings in silence. Raymond's great-grandfather William had purchased timberland in South Carolina during the Depression for pennies on the dollar. His grandfather Samuel had bought commercial property in Alabama in the 1960s, when urban renewal pushed black businesses out of downtown areas. No one noticed because the Patterson name never appeared on public records. Everything ran through limited liability companies with names like Piedmont Holdings, LLC, Southern Heritage Properties, and Decatur Land Management. Raymond's grandmother Evelyn had been the one to modernize the operation. In 1983, she'd incorporated Patterson Heritage Holdings as a private real estate investment trust, consolidating generations of scattered shell companies into a single corporate structure with 34 subsidiary LLCs. She'd hired lawyers, accountants, and property managers who understood that discretion was more valuable than recognition. By the time she died in 2023 at age 89, Patterson Heritage Holdings owned 847,000 acres across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, plus commercial developments in 34 states. The trust had been valued at $31 billion when Raymond inherited it in 2011. He'd been 25 years old, fresh out of Morehouse with a degree in business administration, and his grandmother had sat him down in her living room the week before she transferred control. She'd poured him sweet tea from a pitcher that had belonged to her mother and told him the family's central rule. "Loud money dies fast," she'd said. "Quiet money lives forever. You wear that like it's scripture, you hear me?" Raymond had nodded. The white folks who want to tear us down, they're looking for flash, gold chains, fancy cars, houses that announce themselves. You give them that, they'll find a reason to take it. Tax audit, zoning violation, eminent domain. They got 1,000 legal ways to strip wealth from people who look like us. But if they don't know you have it, they can't touch it. She'd handed him the corporate documents then, along with a lockbox she told him not to open, until he faced a choice between silence and truth. Over the next 15 years, Raymond had expanded Patterson Heritage Holdings from $31 billion to $47 billion. He'd modernized the leasing agreements with commercial developers, negotiated new mineral rights deals, acquired industrial warehouses near the port of Savannah, and purchased residential developments across the southeast. The corporate structure remained invisible to anyone not looking for it. Patterson Holdings leased land to companies who built shopping centers, office parks, and subdivisions without ever knowing who actually owned the ground beneath their projects. Raymond's employees knew him as Mr. Patterson, the quiet CEO who reviewed quarterly reports with meticulous attention and asked detailed questions about property maintenance and tenant relations. Simone had never connected the dots. She'd never wondered why Raymond disappeared 3 mornings a week to the nondescript office in Decatur. She'd never asked what he did on the laptop he kept in the barn, checking emails while soil samples dried on the workbench. She'd never questioned how they could live in a 3-bedroom house in Stone Mountain on a farmer's income, because she'd been too busy resenting the fact that it wasn't a mansion. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m, Raymond's chief financial officer, Patricia Okonkwo, sent him the weekly financial report. Revenue from commercial leases, occupancy rates across the residential portfolio, timber sales from the South Carolina properties, mineral rights payments from the Alabama holdings. The numbers scrolled past in dense columns that represented more wealth than Simone had posted about in 15 years of Instagram performance. Raymond checked those emails on his phone in the barn, surrounded by tools and fertilizer bags, while Simone sat in the house planning her escape to a man whose entire empire was built on land Raymond owned. The lockbox his grandmother had given him sat unopened in the bedroom closet for 15 years, waiting for the moment Evelyn had predicted would eventually come. The moment when silence and truth could no longer coexist. Raymond arrived at Patterson Heritage Holdings headquarters at 8:47 a.m., the lockbox sitting in the passenger seat where it had spent the night. He'd slept 2 hours in the Waffle House parking lot, then driven straight to the office park in Decatur as the sun rose over the city. Marcus Webb was already waiting in the lobby when Raymond walked in. The corporate attorney was 51, grey at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored specifically for moments like this. He'd been the Patterson family's lawyer for 23 years, had helped Evelyn structure the REIT back in the 80s, and knew every acre of land the family controlled. "Raymond," Marcus said, extending his hand, "Patricia's already upstairs." They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence. Patricia Okonkwo was in the main conference room with her laptop open and 3 monitors displaying spreadsheets that Raymond recognized as the holdings portfolio. She was 47, efficient, brilliant with numbers, and had served as Patterson Holdings' chief financial officer for the past decade. She looked up when Raymond entered, her expression carefully neutral. "You brought it," she said, nodding at the lockbox. Raymond set it on the conference table. The brass clasp was tarnished, the leather handle worn smooth from his grandmother's grip. He'd carried this box from house to house for 15 years without opening it, trusting Evelyn's instruction that he would know when the time came. The time had come. He opened the lockbox. Inside were documents that represented 160 years of Patterson family history. The original 1897 land deed signed by Thomas Patterson, the ink faded but still legible, transferring 40 acres from the Freedmen's Bureau to the family. Corporate succession documents showing the unbroken chain of ownership from Thomas to Isaac to William to Samuel to Evelyn to Raymond. Stock certificates proving Raymond's 100% ownership of Patterson Heritage Holdings and all 34 subsidiary corporations. And a flash drive. "What's on it?" Raymond asked, holding up the small device. Marcus took it carefully. "Your grandmother told me 2 years before she died that this contained evidence. She said you'd need it when you faced a choice." Patricia plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Security footage filled the center monitor. The first clip showed Simone and Terrell at a property in Gwinnett County, standing in front of a partially constructed subdivision. The timestamp read April 2024. Terrell was gesturing broadly, clearly explaining something, while Simone took photos on her phone. The second clip showed them at another site in Cobb County. Then another in Fulton, then another in DeKalb. 17 different locations over 2 years. "These are all Patterson Holdings properties," Patricia said quietly, cross-referencing the GPS coordinates against her database. "Our property management systems have security cameras on every major holding. Your grandmother must have been monitoring this for years." The footage continued. A meeting between Terrell and a man Raymond didn't recognize, shot from a security camera mounted on what appeared to be a county building. They were exchanging an envelope. Patricia paused the video, zoomed in on the man's face, ran it through a database. "Gerald Morris," she said, "DeKalb County zoning supervisor." Marcus leaned forward. "That's a bribe being documented." Patricia pulled up financial records, her fingers moving across the keyboard like she was conducting an orchestra. "I can trace it. Shell account registered to a Bahamas LLC, $250,000 transferred 3 days after this meeting, routed through 2 intermediary banks before landing in Morris's personal account." The next series of clips showed Simone. She was sitting in what looked like a notary's office, signing documents. The camera angle was from above, clearly showing the paperwork spread across the desk. Patricia enhanced the image, zoomed in on the letterhead, Patterson Heritage Holdings. "She's signing as Simone Patterson, Trust Administrator," Marcus said, his voice cold with professional precision. "She has no authority to act on behalf of the trust. These are forgeries." The documents detailed the sale of timber rights on Patterson land in South Carolina for $2.1 million. Mineral rights on Alabama property for $3.4 million. Easements on Georgia holdings for $1.2 million. All the funds had been transferred to shell companies that Patricia traced back to Terrell Morrison's control within minutes. Total fraud, $6.7 million. "Because Simone is your spouse," Marcus said, "the forgery charges will stick federally." Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, Wire Fraud. She used electronic transfers to move the money, which makes it a federal crime. We have security footage, bank records, and forged signatures. This is prosecutable. Raymond stared at the screen showing his wife's face as she signed away rights to land she had no authority over. Patricia pulled up another spreadsheet. "The Stone Mountain House," she said, "Lot 8, 47-B. That property was leased to DeKalb County in 1998 for conservation purposes, with the understanding that Patterson Holdings would maintain the mineral rights and could reclaim at any time. It was never sold. Simone has been living there as a trust beneficiary, not an owner. She doesn't have legal standing to keep it in a divorce because she never owned it in the first place." Marcus nodded. "The house reverts to Patterson Holdings the moment the lease is terminated." Patricia wasn't finished. She pulled up a map showing 17 subdivisions across Metro Atlanta, each one highlighted in red. Crown Development Group's entire portfolio displayed like pins on a battlefield map. "Every single one," Patricia said, "is built on Patterson Holdings land. Terrell leases these parcels through our subsidiary LLCs. He signs agreements with companies called Piedmont Holdings, Southern Heritage Properties, Decatur Land Management. He thinks he's dealing with absentee corporate landlords who don't pay attention. He has no idea they all roll up to you." Raymond looked at the screen. 17 subdivisions, $340 million in active construction projects. An empire built entirely on land he owned by a man who'd filmed his humiliation and promised to post it for entertainment. Marcus spoke carefully. "You have a choice here, Raymond. You can walk away, terminate the marriage quietly, reclaim your property, let Simone and Terrell continue their fraud somewhere else. You'd keep your privacy intact, no public exposure." Patricia pulled up a final spreadsheet showing the projected cascade if Patterson Holdings activated what she called full corporate remediation. 17 construction sites halted within 72 hours, 340 families receiving letters that their deeds were invalid, investor lawsuits, federal fraud charges, bankruptcy, complete financial and social destruction within 30 days. Raymond sat in silence, looking at the numbers. The pacing had shifted. The slow burn was over. Raymond looked at Marcus Webb across the conference table and spoke 2 words. "Do it." Marcus nodded once, pulled his laptop closer, and began typing. Patricia opened a separate document on her screen, fingers moving with the precision of someone who'd run these scenarios 100 times in corporate war rooms. "Full corporate remediation," Marcus said, confirming the authorization. "We'll execute in 5 phases, sequenced for maximum legal impact." He pulled up a timeline on the main monitor. Phase 1 would launch immediately. Cease and desist letters to every active Crown Development construction site on Patterson Holdings land. 17 projects from Gwinnett to Fulton to Cobb to DeKalb. The letters would demand immediate cessation of all construction activity within 72 hours or face criminal trespass charges. Marcus's firm would file the documents electronically within the hour, serve them physically by end of business day. "Construction stops by Friday," Patricia said, running the numbers. 340 million in frozen projects. Every contractor, subcontractor and supplier will demand payment for work completed. Tyrrell won't have the liquidity. Phase 2 would hit 48 hours later. Legal reclamation of the Stone Mountain house under the original 1998 conservation lease. The property had never been sold to private owners. It remained Patterson Holdings land, leased to DeKalb County, with the understanding that the family could reclaim at any time. Simone and Terrell would receive eviction notice Thursday morning, enforcement by county sheriff on Saturday. "She'll be on the curb by the weekend," Marcus said without emotion. Phase 3 was the criminal referral. Marcus would personally deliver the evidence package to the DeKalb County District Attorney and the FBI Atlanta Field Office. Simone's forged documents authorizing the sale of timber rights, mineral rights, and easements she had no authority to transfer. Terrell's bribery payments to Gerald Morris, traced through shell accounts and wire transfers, bank records showing $6.7 million in fraudulent proceeds. Federal wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, Marcus said. Because Simone used electronic transfers across state lines, it's prosecutable in federal court. The DA will coordinate with FBI on the bribery charges against Morris and Tyrrell. Patricia added context. Morris will flip on Tyrrell within a week of arrest. He's 55, facing mandatory minimum sentencing. He'll cooperate to reduce his exposure. Phase 4 would destroy Crown Development's financial foundation. Notification letters to all 340 families who'd purchased homes in Tyrrell's subdivisions, informing them that their deeds were invalid because Crown Development had never owned the land beneath their houses. The letters would include documentation proving Patterson Holdings' ownership and an invitation to negotiate legitimate purchase agreements at fair market value. They'll file a class action lawsuit against Crown Development within days, Marcus said. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of contract. Tyrrell's insurance won't cover it because he committed intentional acts. Phase 5 would trigger the investor collapse. Letters to every person and institution that had provided capital to Crown Development, informing them that the company's primary collateral, the land under their projects, was not Tyrrell's to leverage. The loans were secured by assets Tyrrell didn't own. Patricia pulled up the investor list. Lead investor is Marcus Chen, $23 million. He'll file an emergency lawsuit to freeze Crown Development's accounts and demand immediate return of all funds. The others will follow within hours. Total investor exposure is $89 million. Tyrrell will file Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 2 weeks, Marcus said. But because the fraud is documented, the bankruptcy won't discharge his criminal liability or protect him from the civil judgments. Raymond listened to the plan unfold like a chess match where every move had been calculated 3 steps ahead. Patricia ran a final projection on her screen. Timeline to total collapse, 30 days. 17 construction sites shut down, 340 families filing suit, 89 million in investor lawsuits, federal fraud charges against Simone, bribery charges against Tyrrell and Morris, Crown Development liquidated, both of them facing prison time and restitution they'll never be able to pay. Marcus began filing the first documents at 2:47 p.m. The electronic filings went through the court system in minutes, time-stamped and recorded. By 3:15 p.m., process servers were delivering physical copies of the cease and desist letters to Crown Development's registered agent at their Buckhead office. The machinery was in motion, unstoppable now, moving with the cold efficiency of a legal system that had been fed irrefutable evidence of systematic fraud. Raymond made one additional call. He dialed a number he'd known since childhood, the private line, to Reverend Dr. James Thornton's office at Greater Mount Calvary Baptist Church. The Reverend had baptized Raymond, presided over his grandmother's funeral, and served as the moral center of the Patterson family's spiritual life for 4 decades. "Reverend Thornton," Raymond said when the man answered, "I need to ask you about a wedding booking." The Reverend's voice was warm but cautious. "Raymond, I heard about what happened with Simone. I'm sorry, son." The wedding she's planning with Terrell Morrison. It's scheduled for next month at Greater Mount Calvary. There was a pause. Yes. She made the reservation 6 weeks ago, paid the deposit. I need you to check the church's lease agreement, Raymond said quietly. The property Greater Mount Calvary sits on. He heard papers shuffling, the sound of a filing cabinet opening. Reverend Thornton's voice changed when he found the document. Patterson Heritage Holdings, perpetual lease established in 1985, renewable annually, rent set at $1 per year in recognition of the Patterson family's commitment to the community. Read the moral fitness clause, Raymond said. More shuffling. Then the Reverend read aloud, his pastoral cadence making the legal language sound like scripture. All parties using Greater Mount Calvary facilities must demonstrate moral fitness and good standing within the community. The lesser, Patterson Heritage Holdings, reserves the right to deny facility access to individuals engaged in criminal conduct, fraud, or behavior contrary to the church's values. Silence on the line. Raymond, Reverend Thornton said slowly, what's about to happen? Simone is going to be charged with federal wire fraud. Terrell is going to be charged with bribery and conspiracy. The evidence is being delivered to the FBI this afternoon. The Reverend exhaled. The wedding is cancelled. I'm not asking you to do anything, Raymond said. I'm just making sure you have the information you need to protect the church. I'll send the cancellation letter today, Reverend Thornton said. And Raymond? Your grandmother would be proud of how you handled this. Quiet until the moment it mattered. Raymond thanked him and ended the call. Marcus looked up from his laptop. The first documents just hit Terrell's office. Process server confirmed delivery at 4:02 p.m. The legal machinery had engaged. The process server walked into Crown Development Group's Buckhead offices at 4:02 p.m., carrying a manila envelope that would destroy everything Terrell Morrison had built. The receptionist signed for it, walked it back to Terrell's corner office, and handed it to him while he was on a call with a contractor about tile selection for the Gwinnett project. Terrell opened the envelope absently, still talking about grout colours. Then he stopped mid-sentence. The letterhead read Patterson Heritage Holdings, a name he'd never heard in his life. The opening paragraph demanded immediate cessation of all construction activities on 17 parcels of land listed in the attached schedule. The language was cold, legal, precise. Failure to comply within 72 hours would result in criminal trespass charges and immediate legal action. Terrell ended the call without saying goodbye. He dialed his corporate attorney, Vanessa Kim, hands shaking slightly as he held the document. She answered on the second ring. I need you to look up a company, Terrell said. Patterson Heritage Holdings. They're claiming I'm building on their land. Vanessa went quiet for a moment, typing. I've never heard of them. Let me search the corporate registry. More typing, then silence. Vanessa? I'm looking. Give me a second. Terrell's phone started buzzing with incoming calls. He ignored them, waiting for Vanessa to find something, anything, that would explain why some mystery company was threatening to shut down his entire operation. His construction supervisor for the Cobb County project called. Terrell answered. We got county inspectors here shutting us down, the supervisor said. They're saying we don't have valid permits. What's going on? It was 5 p.m. Terrell's other line lit up. Fulton County site, then DeKalb, then Gwinnett, 4 different construction projects, 4 different supervisors, all reporting the same thing. County officials arriving with stop work orders, inspectors demanding to see permits and land ownership documents, crews being told to cease operations immediately. This doesn't make sense, Terrell said to no one in particular. His phone exploded with texts and calls, contractors demanding answers, subcontractors asking if they should pull their crews, investors wanting to know why construction had stopped across multiple sites simultaneously. Vanessa called back. Terrell, I found Patterson Heritage Holdings. It's a private REIT. They're showing assets of $47 billion, land holdings across Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina. Who owns it? That's the thing, it's privately held. The corporate filing lists a sole owner, but I need to pull the full documentation. Terrell hung up and called the title company that had handled his Stone Mountain property acquisition. The one Simone was so excited about, the $8 million flip that was supposed to cement his reputation as a major player. The title officer searched her records. Mr. Morrison, I'm looking at the property history now. This land was never sold to you. It's currently leased to DeKalb County for conservation purposes by Patterson Heritage Holdings. You don't have ownership. The words hit like a physical blow. That's impossible. I've been developing it for 6 months. Sir, according to these records, you never had legal authority to develop this property. Terrell ended the call, feeling panic creep up his spine like cold water rising. At 6:30 p.m., 4 federal agents walked into Crown Development Group's offices with a search warrant. They were from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They wanted every document, email, and financial record related to Gerald Morris and DeKalb County zoning permits. Terrell tried calling Gerald Morris. The number was disconnected. The Porsche Cayenne he'd parked outside that night at Raymond's house, the one he'd mentioned specifically to humiliate the man, suddenly felt like evidence of arrogance that was about to cost him everything. By 7:45 p.m., Simone was calling him, screaming. She'd received an eviction notice at the Stone Mountain house. A county sheriff had served it personally, handing her a document that informed her she was residing on property owned by Patterson Heritage Holdings without legal authority. She had 72 hours to vacate. "What is Patterson Heritage Holdings?" Simone shouted into the phone. "Terrell, what is happening?" "I don't know," Terrell said, which was the truth. He was in his office, surrounded by legal documents he didn't understand, watching his phone light up with calls from people demanding answers he didn't have. The FBI agents were boxing up files in the conference room. His construction sites were shut down. His flagship property was apparently owned by someone else. His empire was collapsing in real time, and he couldn't see the mechanism destroying it. Vanessa called back. "I found the full corporate filing for Patterson Heritage Holdings." "Who owns it?" "The founder and chief executive officer is Raymond Patterson." The name landed like a punch. Raymond, the broke farmer, the man who drove a 15-year-old truck and smelled like fertilizer, the man Terrell had filmed being thrown out of his own house and promised to post for laughs. Terrell pulled up Google, typed Patterson Heritage Holdings into the search bar. The website was bland, corporate, unremarkable. A simple landing page with minimal information. Holdings in commercial real estate across the Southeast. Private REIT established 1983. Assets under management, $47 billion. Founder and chief executive officer, Raymond Patterson. No photo, no biography, just a name and a title. Terrell stared at the screen, his Rolex suddenly feeling heavy on his wrist, and understood with devastating clarity that every subdivision he'd built, every billboard with his face on it, every deal he'd celebrated, had been constructed on land owned by the man whose wife he'd stolen and whose humiliation he'd filmed for entertainment. The morning news cycle was about to accelerate everything, but Terrell didn't know that yet. All he knew was that the ground beneath his empire had never belonged to him at all. Day 2. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ran the story above the fold. Crown Development faces federal fraud probe. The article detailed the FBI investigation, the shutdown of 17 construction sites, the questions about land ownership. Terrell's face appeared in the accompanying photo, taken outside his Buckhead office looking stunned. By noon, 340 families who'd bought Crown Development homes received certified letters. Your deed is invalid. The land beneath your home was never owned by Crown Development Group. Contact information for Patterson Heritage Holdings was included for legitimate purchase negotiations. The class action lawsuit was filed by 2 p.m. 17 construction sites sat empty, machinery idle, workers sent home, contractors demanding payment for work already completed. Terrell's phone ringing constantly with calls he couldn't answer. Raymond read the news from his office in Decatur, Patricia Okonkwo standing behind him reviewing the same articles on her tablet. "It's accelerating faster than projected," she said. Day 4. DeKalb County District Attorney held a press conference at 10 a.m. Gerald Morris had been arrested at his home that morning. The charges: accepting bribes, conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of public office. The DA named Terrell Morrison as a co-conspirator, detailed the $250,000 payment, showed bank records on screens behind the podium. News cameras broadcast it live. By noon, Terrell's lead investor Marcus Chen had filed an emergency lawsuit demanding the immediate return of $23 million plus damages. The complaint accused Terrell of fraudulent misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and operating a scheme built on land he didn't own. 6 other investors filed similar suits within hours. Combined exposure, $89 million. Day 6. The eviction happened at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. DeKalb County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Stone Mountain house with a court order and a moving truck. Simone and Terrell's belongings were placed on the curb. Furniture, clothes, the designer handbags Simone had posted on Instagram, the watches, the shoes. News cameras were present because someone had tipped them off. The footage aired on 3 local stations. Simone screaming at the deputies that this was her house, that she had rights, that this was illegal. Terrell trying to de-escalate, failing, looking desperate in a wrinkled shirt he'd been wearing for 2 days. Mrs. Chen watched from across the street, same spot where she'd witnessed Raymond's lockout 2 weeks earlier. Day 8. Crown Development Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Assets listed $4.2 million. Liabilities $427 million. The math was devastating. 17 subdivisions built on land Terrell never owned. Loans secured by collateral he had no rights to. Investor capital gone. Contractor payments owed. Legal judgments mounting. The bankruptcy trustee froze everything. Day 9, federal charges dropped. The FBI charged Simone Patterson with wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. The indictment detailed her forged signatures on Patterson Heritage Holdings documents, the electronic transfer of $6.7 million in fraudulent timber rights, mineral rights, and easement sales. Each count carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. Her bank accounts were frozen, her assets seized. The IRS placed liens on everything she owned, which wasn't much because most of it had been financed with credit cards. Day 10. Simone Luck's life collapsed. Her Instagram followers had started noticing the news coverage. Questions appeared in the comments, then accusations, then mockery. Someone found the footage of her eviction and shared it. Then the federal indictment became public record. The luxury lifestyle she'd built was exposed as fraud. Every vacation photo, every designer bag, every spa day, every post about living her best life was revealed as credit card debt and borrowed money. Her followers turned on her like a pack of wolves. She lost 280,000 followers in 48 hours. Brand partnerships cancelled, sponsorship deals terminated. Her account, once worth thousands in monthly income, became a liability. She deleted it on day 12. Day 12. Greater Mount Calvary Baptist Church sent a formal letter. Reverend Dr. James Thornton signed it personally. Your wedding booking is cancelled due to violation of the moral fitness clause in the facility use agreement. The deposit would not be refunded. The letter cited the federal fraud charges, the public scandal, and the church's obligation to maintain its standards. Simone and Terrell had nowhere to go. They were sleeping in Terrell's mother's basement in College Park, sharing a twin bed, surrounded by boxes of belongings salvaged from the eviction. Day 14. The final domino fell on live television. Terrell had parked outside Vanessa Kim's law office for a meeting about bankruptcy strategy. The repo company arrived while he was inside. 2 men with a flatbed truck and legal paperwork. The Porsche Cayenne, the pearl-white status symbol he'd flaunted outside Raymond's house, was repossessed in broad daylight. A local news crew happened to be in the area covering another story. They filmed it. The footage aired at 5 p.m. Terrell Morrison, disgraced developer, watching helplessly as his car was loaded onto a truck and driven away. His investor's lawsuit had been amended that morning. The demand had increased to $89 million in damages plus attorney's fees. At 6:47 p.m., Terrell's phone buzzed with a notification from Crown Developments Bank. Court-ordered levy executed. Corporate accounts frozen pending resolution of creditor claims. Balance $347.18. Everything was gone. Terrell sat in Vanessa Kim's office, staring at his phone, understanding with absolute clarity that the empire he'd built over 5 years had been dismantled in 2 weeks by a man he'd filmed being humiliated for entertainment. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, Marcus Webb's office. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Raymond Patterson has agreed to meet with you and Simone one final time. The confrontation was coming. They arrived at Marcus Webb's law office at 1:53 p.m., 7 minutes early, looking like people who'd aged a decade in 16 days. Terrell wore a wrinkled button-down shirt that he'd clearly slept in, no tie, khakis that needed pressing. The Rolex was gone, sold to pay for Vanessa Kim's final retainer invoice before she'd dropped him as a client. Simone had no makeup, hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt that had belonged to her college roommate because everything she'd owned had been either seized by the FBI or left on the curb during the eviction. They were sleeping in Terrell's mother's basement in College Park, sharing a twin bed, surrounded by boxes they couldn't afford to store properly. Marcus Webb's receptionist showed them to the conference room without speaking. They sat on one side of the long mahogany table, waiting. The room smelled like leather and old money. Through the window, downtown Atlanta spread out below them, a city where they'd once imagined themselves as power players. Raymond arrived at exactly 2 p.m. He walked in wearing work boots caked with red Georgia clay, denim jeans with worn knees, and a plain grey t-shirt that had a small tear near the collar. The same kind of outfit Simone had mocked for 15 years. The same clothes he'd been wearing the night she'd changed the locks and called him too broke and too country for the life she deserved. Marcus Webb followed him in, carrying a leather portfolio, and took a seat at the head of the table. Simone's face crumpled the moment she saw Raymond. Tears started immediately, the kind of desperate crying that comes from someone who's lost everything and knows it. "Raymond, baby," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. We can fix this. We can work this out." Raymond sat down across from them, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't respond. Terrell leaned forward, trying a different approach. Man to man, businessman to businessman. "Look, Raymond," Terrell said, "I know things got out of hand, but we're all adults here. We can negotiate, work something out that benefits everyone. No need for this to go nuclear." Raymond looked at him with the same quiet patience he'd shown for 15 years. Then he spoke. "Simone, do you remember the night we met? Spelman Homecoming, 2011. You asked me what I did, and I said I worked the family land. You were impressed. You told your friends you'd met a man who owned property." Raymond's voice was soft, measured, every word landing with surgical precision. "I never corrected you. I never told you it was more than 40 acres. I let you believe what you wanted to believe." Simone wiped her eyes, confused about where this was going. For 15 years you told me I embarrassed you. My truck was too old. My clothes were too cheap. I smelled like fertilizer. I wore overalls to church. I didn't have a real job. I was too country, too broke, too beneath you. He let that sit for a moment. You posted about luxury on Instagram while financing it with credit cards. You complained about our modest house while I worked 14-hour days. You met Terrell at a Black Excellence in Real Estate Gala and saw your escape, a successful developer, someone who looked wealthy, someone you weren't ashamed to be seen with. Terrell shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. You filmed me being kicked out of my home, Raymond said, looking directly at Terrell now. You stood there with your Rolex and your Porsche and your smirk. And you recorded my humiliation. You said you'd post it, make it entertainment. The room was silent, except for Simone's quiet crying. Raymond reached into the portfolio Marcus had placed in front of him and pulled out a document. The faded surveyor's map, the one Simone had mocked for years as old property lines that didn't mean nothing. He unfolded it on the table. The map had been annotated in red ink, property lines highlighted, acreage marked, subsidiary corporation names listed, 847,000 acres across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, all connected by a web of holdings that spanned 3 states and 34 subsidiary companies. You spent 15 years calling me a broke farmer playing in dirt, Raymond said quietly. But what you didn't know was that I'm the chief executive officer of a $47 billion empire, and I own the dirt. He slid the map toward them. Every acre under every building you've ever called success. The house you thought you were keeping? Mine. Patterson Heritage Holdings property. You were living there as a trust beneficiary, not an owner. The 17 subdivisions you thought you built, Terrell. My land, leased to you through subsidiary corporations you didn't know I controlled. Your entire identity was constructed on my permission. Simone stared at the map like it was written in a foreign language. The Stone Mountain property you were flipping for $8 million, Lot 847-B, Patterson Holdings land, illegally developed after you bribed Gerald Morris with $250,000 to issue fraudulent permits. Raymond's voice never rose, never wavered. Every billboard with your face on it, Terrell, was on land I owned. Every contract you signed, every investor you courted, every family you sold a house to, all of it built on ground that belonged to me. Terrell's face had gone grey. Why didn't you tell me? Simone asked, her voice breaking. If you had all this money, why didn't you tell me? Raymond looked at her with something close to pity. Because my grandmother taught me that loud money dies fast, quiet money lives forever. She told me to work the original land to remember where we came from. She told me that people who love what you have, instead of who you are, will always leave when they find something that looks better. He gestured toward Terrell. And she was right. You didn't love me. You loved what you thought Terrell had, the visible wealth, the performance, the Instagram lifestyle. Raymond's words were quiet but devastating. You committed wire fraud to steal from my company and funnel $6.7 million to shell accounts he controlled. You forged corporate documents. You sold rights to land you had no authority over, and you thought you'd get away with it because you believed I was powerless. Simone was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I could have stopped this at any point, Raymond said. I could have pulled back the legal action, called off the investigations, prevented the cascade, but I didn't. Because you needed to understand what you'd destroyed, not my wealth. You never touched that. You destroyed the possibility of grace. He stood up. Marcus will proceed with all charges. Federal wire fraud for Simone. Bribery and conspiracy for you, Terrell. The investor lawsuits, the class action from the families you defrauded. All of it moves forward. Raymond looked at Marcus Webb. No settlements, no negotiations. Full prosecution. Simone reached across the table toward him. Raymond, please. He walked toward the door without looking back. "You'll never see me again," he said. "But you'll spend the next few years thinking about the night you locked me out of a house that was never yours and mocked a man whose only crime was loving you quietly." Raymond left the conference room, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded final. 6 months later, the legal system had finished what Raymond started. Terrell Morrison was convicted on 14 counts of bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and wire fraud. The federal judge sentenced him to 11 years in prison with no possibility of early release. The restitution order demanded $14 million, money he would never have, payable to the investors and families he'd defrauded. Crown Development Group was liquidated in bankruptcy proceedings. Terrell's investors recovered 8 cents per dollar invested. Simone pleaded guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud rather than face trial. Her attorney had advised her that the evidence was overwhelming, the security footage and forged documents impossible to dispute. She was sentenced to 4 years at Federal Correctional Institution Tallahassee. Her bank accounts had been frozen, her assets seized, the Instagram account that had defined her identity deleted. Her mother stopped visiting after the 2nd month. Gerald Morris received 7 years for accepting bribes and abuse of public office. He'd cooperated with prosecutors, testified against Terrell, reduced his sentence from 12 years by naming every developer who'd ever paid him to expedite permits. None of that cooperation had helped Terrell. The 340 families who'd bought homes in Crown Development subdivisions received letters from Patterson Heritage Holdings offering them a choice. Legitimate purchase agreements at 60% of their original price or full refunds plus relocation assistance. Most stayed. They were grateful for the fairness, relieved to have clear title to land they'd thought they owned all along. Raymond used his victory the way his grandmother had taught him to use everything, quietly, purposefully, with an eye toward generations not yet born. He established the Evelyn Patterson Foundation with a $500 million endowment. The foundation's mission was specific: scholarships for black students pursuing degrees in agriculture, business, and land management. Applications opened in September. By December, 212 students had received full 4-year scholarships to historically black colleges and universities across the Southeast. Raymond still worked the 40-acre family plot 3 mornings a week, Tuesday through Thursday, dawn until noon. He spent Monday and Friday at Patterson Heritage Holdings headquarters in Decatur, reviewing quarterly reports with Patricia Okonkwo, approving lease agreements, meeting with property managers. Weekends belonged to the foundation, reviewing scholarship applications, visiting campuses, speaking to students about the difference between wealth that announces itself and wealth that endures. He met Dr. Naomi Sterling on Thanksgiving at Greater Mount Calvary Baptist Church. The service started at 10 in the morning, the sanctuary filled with families who'd been members for generations. Reverend Dr. James Thornton preached from Proverbs, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in the pulpit. Raymond sat in the 3rd pew on the left, same seat his grandmother had occupied for 30 years. Naomi sat 2 rows behind him, alone, taking notes in a leather journal. After the service, during the fellowship hour in the community hall, she approached him while he was pouring coffee from the large silver urn the church had owned since 1987. "Raymond Patterson?" she asked. He turned. She was 36, wearing a navy dress and a coral cardigan, hair pulled back, glasses perched on her nose, holding her journal like it contained something precious. "I'm Naomi Sterling. I teach at Morehouse, African American Land Tenure Studies." She extended her hand. "I've been researching historic black land ownership in the South, and your family's story keeps appearing in property records going back to Reconstruction. I was hoping I might ask you some questions." Raymond shook her hand. "What kind of questions?" "How your family held on to land when so many others lost theirs. The legal structures you used, the strategies for preservation across generations." Her eyes were bright with genuine curiosity, the kind that comes from someone who cares about the subject matter itself, not what it represents. "I can do better than answer questions," Raymond said. "I can open the Patterson family archives, original deeds, incorporation documents, letters between family members about strategy. It's all preserved. Naomi's face lit up. That would be invaluable for my research. Coffee became lunch at a soul food restaurant on Ponce de Leon. Lunch became dinner the following week. Dinner became long walks through Piedmont Park, conversations about legacy and stewardship and what it means to be a custodian of something larger than yourself. There was no rush, no performance, no Instagram posts or status updates, just two people who understood that real wealth is measured in generations, not credit card limits. At the Christmas Eve service, Reverend Thornton delivered a sermon that felt like it had been written for Raymond, though the pastor never looked directly at him while speaking. "The loudest voices are rarely the wisest ones," Reverend Thornton said, his cadence slow and measured. "Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who never needed to announce it. Power that requires a spotlight is fragile. Power that works in silence is unshakable." The congregation murmured their agreement. Raymond thought about Simone in federal prison, about Terrell in a cell counting the years until release, about the surveyor's map that now hung in a frame in Patterson Heritage Holdings' boardroom. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Silence protects what loudness destroys. After the service, Raymond and Naomi stood in the church parking lot under string lights someone had hung between the lampposts. She was heading to her sister's house in Savannah for the holiday. He was spending it at his uncle's place in Lithonia with the extended Patterson family, the same quiet people who'd attended his wedding to Simone 15 years ago and said nothing about the disparity they'd witnessed. "I'll see you when you get back," Raymond said. "I'm counting on it," Naomi replied. She drove away in a 10-year-old Honda Civic that ran perfectly because she maintained it properly, and Raymond stood in the parking lot thinking about his grandmother's voice, the lockbox instruction, the choice between silence and truth. He'd chosen both. The truth had destroyed the people who'd tried to take what wasn't theirs. The silence had protected everything that mattered. What would you have done in Raymond's position? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that real power doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs patience to reveal itself. If you want to hear more stories like this one, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.